Hey, what's good, self-direct investors? I hope you're all doing great, and I want to welcome you back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Jordan, and today we're coming at you with the midweek update in the world of cannabis. Now, before we jump in, if you enjoy this video or you learned something, please just leave a like on it, as it really helps out my channel. And of course, if you want to learn how to take advantage of this generational investment opportunity, subscribe below so that you don't miss any future videos. And there's plenty of content for you to go back, rewatch, and educate yourself with. Try to think of it as a time capsule. I've tried to put all the news and facts in one place so that you can watch episodes over time to learn about the evolution of the U.S. cannabis industry, identify top U.S. MSOs that you keep seeing pop up, and take advantage whenever you feel ready if you wish to do so. Of course, pending whatever incremental reform we get from now until the end of the year, if we actually get anything from these do-nothing Dems. Well, this news was certainly unexpected out of Baltimore. We will fucking take it, as rec and med cannabis sales in Maryland rake in $42 million over the past week, they say. And so while we thought it was very impressive that they did $21 million in their first week after launching, it seems like there's a lot of potential, and Maryland is just getting started, especially as many Americans likely live outside of Maryland that do not have access to legal cannabis, and therefore they're willing to drive into Maryland and vote for legal cannabis with their dollars, hence that massive increase. And so will this be sustainable? We don't know. From my understanding, a $42.6 million, if they could do this every single week, not likely sustainable, but that would be $2.2 billion in their first year, way more than they were expecting. And so obviously at this rate, they're going to bring in a lot of tax revenue. And from my understanding as well, with comparable to just New York, highlighting what to do in Maryland and Missouri and what not to do in states like New York that focus on social equity, is that New York has a combined either 42.6 million or like 60 something million in sales thus far since launching for adult use. Maryland's already beaten them in like 2 to 3 weeks, and so hilarious. And yeah, they will likely become a billion-dollar industry much sooner than 2025 at this rate. And so with that, just wanted to share a recap of states that are doing it well, states that other states would want to copy, unlike New York and other shit shows. Missouri marks record-breaking $592 million in cannabis sales, and so this one's a bit older, as I featured this in past videos, but they're also happy as they're boasting a daily average of roughly 4 million in legal cannabis sales a day. So full story here just to catch up on Missouri if you want. But with that, the big news of the week is Sherrod Brown has been the one to fuck us over this time as opposed to Schmuck. But the good news is his posturing is pissing the right people off. And we got this one from the executive chairman of TerraSen Corp, and thank you JWild for having the balls and the spine to finally clap back and tell it like it is, especially after another week of needlessly delaying the Safe Banking Act. Sherrod Brown has the nerve then to try and fundraise and ask Ohioans for money for his upcoming campaign. You cannot make this shit up. And so great read here if you want to pause to read. But with that, folks, it is Wednesday. We've got a few days left. I would encourage you, if you have not yet, or if you wouldn't mind doing so, reaching out to Sherrod Brown's office in DC and saying that you support having a vote on the Safe Banking Act as soon as possible. No doubt many good reasons why it'll make America safer and get cash off the streets. But thank you, Christopher Norman, as I believe he wrote this email to Ohio State workers unions to try and wake them up to the Sherrod Brown delaying the Safe Banking Act and how that would affect any medical cannabis worker in Ohio. But all that to say is, how is Senator Brown serving your interest, stifling any vote on the Safe Banking Act in the U.S. Senate as chair of the Banking Committee? If you did want to call in and support, a couple of reasons here that you can provide as your reasoning, and obviously I don't know how much this helps, but I would imagine it helps more than not doing it at all. So if you wouldn't mind, because if there was any time to be turning up the pressure, folks, that's gotta be now. And so last one from JWild as well, just sharing a bit of personal news, but personal news that affects people in the industry, and again, it's pissing them off, which I think is better for us in the long run. Bad news and good news: Citibank just closed my personal bank accounts and all my Citi credit cards, but get this, they said they think I may be involved in cannabis. Of course he's involved in cannabis! He's executive chairman of TerraSen Corp, and he manages a big private equity fund that invests in cannabis, probably partially in other investments, but still, like, it's just how ridiculous this is, and it's starting to affect people in the industry, the bigger ups that actually have sway. And so he's saying, just to be clear, this happened last week. It's not because of any recent tweets. He's just starting to express how he's getting really pissed off and frustrated, much like I imagine the 500K cannabis industry employees are frustrated every single day based on the discrimination. And so, I mean, until we get safe, obviously it's not the be-all, end-all. The rescheduling announcement is going to be a big deal. If it gets rescheduled to Schedule 3 or lower, we don't essentially need safe, although, of course, safe sooner than later. Safe 2 years ago would have been great for everyone in the industry. It would have saved many lives, especially when we get continued stories like this. Fortunately, no one died in this one, but out of CBS News... no, you shut up. Suspects sought after 2 weekend break-ins at Santa Rosa cannabis dispensaries. If you passed safe 2 years ago, the incentive for these robberies would no longer be there because these dispensaries wouldn't be filled with cash. It's as simple as that. So I invite you to pause to read more if you're interested in the details. Of course, full story in the description. But with that, we got another one. Washington, unfortunately, this time I get to share with you two stories that involve crime only as opposed to crime, and then sadly the loss of life. But who might be responsible? None other than these three punks that continued to delay the Safe Banking Act, keeping cash in dispensaries, and further incentivizing criminals to continue targeting them. You cannot make this shit up, folks. So please continue to put the pressure on if you can and if you're American. I wish I could, but with that, some good news for marijuana moment as medical cannabis linked to lower pain and reduce dependency on opioids and psychiatric prescription, another study shows. And so we love more of findings like this. Researchers at the University of Florida carried out a 3-month pilot study to assess the efficacy of cannabis among middle-aged and older chronic pain patients. And while cannabis is still stuck in the Schedule 1 classification, likely why we get many studies with promising results, but very small sample sizes, because we can't necessarily just have large sizes. Main thing though, the study published this month in the journal Cannabis found that most participants perceived medical cannabis to be overall effective for chronic pain management. What do you know? Similar to what we've seen in the past. The benefits that they reported include reduced pain and anxiety, improved physical and mental functioning, better sleep quality and mood, and less reliance on prescription medications, including opioids and benzodiazepines. What do you know? And so you can pause to read here. One 51-year-old patient reported that medical cannabis treatment is pretty damn effective. Love that straight up testimony from people that it's clearly helping, and they're seeing it as a safer, non-addictive medicinal alternative. And so you can pause to read a little bit more here, otherwise a little bit more down here. Full link in the description if you wanted to go through that. Well, we got this one out of High Times. I do believe I shared this last week, but figured I would share it again just to sort of set up the next story that I have. But High Times shares another study as states with legal weed see drop in mental health treatment. New research found a 37% decrease in those states. Remember this title, because if this data is true, you'd think this would be massive news being blasted everywhere to raise public health awareness and try to save lives, especially when you consider that sadly last year over 100,000 Americans died from opioid overdoses in some form. But get this, states that have legalized recreational use for adults, not just medical, but rec, have also seen a drop in mental health treatment admissions according to newly published research in the journal Health Economics. And so I invite you to pause to read more if you're interested. You can pause for this bit and then I'll bring you down to a bit more. And you can pause to read here too. Otherwise, full link in the description. But I share this to highlight that what do we get out of the mainstream media? The exact opposite. Complete fake news, especially when they say doctor warns. This clown has a doctorate in social policy. He's not a doctor. So if that's not misleading enough, they go with this. Cannabis legalization movement linked to a massive increase in mental illness in the US. No, it's not. I can imagine gender theory being pushed on kids, and then those kids thinking that theory is fact and bringing it into the world. That's probably a much larger increase of mental health, of mental illness. Or let alone the fact that today, Americans not only can, but they seem to be encouraged to take whatever problems they think they have to a problem-affirming doctor, tell the doctor they're feeling some type of way, and then get a bunch of medication prescribed as a solution to their perceived problem. You cannot make this shit up, but I'm willing to bet a lot of money that those two factors are a much bigger driver in the mental illnesses across the US than the cannabis legalization ever could have been. In fact, obviously, the data shows that cannabis legalization decreases mental illness in those states. So someone's wrong, and I'm willing to bet it's this clown who's paid to lie, and sadly, he gets his voice plastered over these mainstream networks that are funded by Big Pharma, brought to you by Pfizer. But the funny thing is of course, in person, they have no balls, they have no spine. You try to call them out or you try to debate. They don't debate, they just block because they know they have no fundamental argument. And so back to reality, at least, as these new findings continue to come out. This one as of July 16th, 2023. Caregivers' perspective on the impact of CBD treatment for Dravet and Lennox-Gastaut syndromes, a multinational qualitative study. And so this one comes from Sage Journals. And it's again another small one because since cannabis is stuck in the Schedule 1 classification, you can't have big sample size studies, unfortunately. Another reason to deschedule. But all that to say, you can pause to read the objective methods and results. All the conclusions, in addition to reduced seizure frequency, massive, obviously, CBD may have a wide range of beneficial effects beyond seizure control that warrant further investigation and why we are pushing for descheduling in the first place. And with that, from PubMed from June 13th, 2023, therapeutic potential of purified cannabidiol, which seems to be the best thing in fighting epilepsy. That I don't think there's any medicine that's been better. Of course, you can pause to read the abstract, but main thing, looking at a bunch of the data that's been discovered in the past. In conclusion, published clinical evidence does support the use of purified CBD in multiple indications beyond epilepsy, especially if you have epilepsy. The problem is that you have seizures. So if you can take CBD and then no longer have seizures, your problems almost go away, right? Obviously, the epilepsy doesn't, but next best thing. And so, however, the evidence base is limited by the number of trials only investigating the acute effects of CBD, testing CBD in healthy volunteers or in very small patient numbers because CBD belongs to cannabis, stuck in the Schedule 1 where it doesn't belong. Large confirmatory phase 3 trials are required in all indications. I'm sure we'll get those once we deschedule cannabis, but until that day, or at least we see it rescheduled, it's going to be tough, and all we can really do is just keep sharing you the reality. Is from Normal, from July 21st. As analysis shows, 1 in 7 use cannabis to recover from work-related injuries, according to data published in the journal BMJ Open. As researchers affiliated with the U of T surveyed nearly 1,200 Canadians who had received workers' comp for either work-related injury or illness, and 14% of respondents said that they use cannabis explicitly to recuperate, so cannabis and nothing else, from a workplace injury, as obviously in Canada, cannabis is legal for both medical and adult use. And so interesting findings, though, as 14% did not need any sort of opioids, it appears. Cannabis clearly has some effect, and while that's a small number, we'd imagine if there was more education and, less forcing of using opioids and prescription medication, we would see more using cannabis. But of course, you can pause to read a lot more in these findings here as well. Got this last interesting visual from the weed CFO highlighting the medical conditions patients cited as their reason for using weed. Now, the thing is, I don't know exactly the source of this, and there's a typo, so not to say that you don't want to trust this data, but using this to just reiterate the fact that I don't give a fuck what prohibitionists say or what they try to tell me. I'm going to look at the data and see that cannabis is clearly a medicine. And so obviously, diagnosed medical conditions being treated with cannabis, the most popular one, 46% chronic pain, migraines 21%, PTSD 17%, and I imagine a lot of veterans are using cannabis to self-medicate in many ways. Osteoarthritis 10%, rheumatoid arthritis 9%, neuropathy 9%, IBS 5%, fibromyalgia 5%, cancer 5%, autism 4%, glaucoma 3%, seizures, epilepsy 3%, anorexia nervosa 3%, and Crohn's disease 3%. All valid reasons why one might want to have access to a safer non-addictive medicinal alternative, right? But get this, not only do we have shitty prohibitionists being spouted on mainstream outlets, but then from Marijuana Moment, the VA and Defense Department oppose medical cannabis for PTSD. The fucking nerve they have to try and do this to veterans, stomp their boot on veterans' faces, again, 60, 70 years after Vietnam, is unbelievable. But take neutral position on psychedelics as research continues. And so you can pause to read a little bit up here for the details. I cannot believe that they would do this to the veterans. As the work group recommends against the use of cannabis or cannabis derivatives in treating patients with PTSD because of the lack of well-diagnosed random controlled trials can't be done because schedule and classification, unfortunately, evaluating the efficacy of cannabis derivatives in large samples of individuals with PTSD and the serious side effects associated with their use, it says. And this is such corrupted horseshit because for the last 2 years, video after video, I've shared study after study after study highlighting the net positive potential benefits of ending cannabis prohibition and descheduling cannabis with next to no adverse or minimal negative side effects. You cannot make this shit up. And what do they cite as their evidence? Themselves from 7 years ago. Like, are you fucking kidding me? Tell us you haven't looked at the new evidence that points out that those who use cannabis actually have higher cognitive function than those who don't, and that cannabis use and actually alcohol use while driving goes down in states that legalize cannabis. And I mean, if that wasn't enough gaslighting for a few paragraphs, they even admit it right down here, is whereas the work group says it found no new evidence on cannabis to treat PTSD since the last joint review in 2017, effectively saying we didn't even bother to look and largely relied on that prior assessment for the current document, meaning we wanted the same outcome, therefore we copy and paste it. And this ought to be infuriating, and we need more things like this to end the division and unite more Americans together, because if even the VA and the DOJ are captured working against the will of the American people, I mean, bigger problems on our hands that Americans need to start standing up. And well, there's a bit more down here you can pause to read. Otherwise, grab the full link in the description because it is a very long one, but there are very interesting findings to read through. But isn't it fascinating to think we've come to a time where at first it was the CIA, the DEA, and the FDA that have been completely captured and pretty much gone overboard, but now even more agencies, Veterans Affairs, Department of Defense, showing that they're throwing science completely out the window in favor of shoving whatever their political science and their agenda is down all of our throats. And people are not going to take it the longer that they continue to do this and act as if they're not doing it at the same time. And it's just fascinating to think that we've got the NFL and the NBA, other organizations, slowly but surely helping normalize the plant, doing the job of these government agencies. And obviously, we hope more athletes would speak up and help normalize the plant sooner than later. But mad respect to Kevin Durant being one of the early ones.
Players, you can invest and you can smoke and everything else, I think.
Definitely. Marijuana is...
But you were a pioneer, if you will.
I wouldn't call myself a pioneer.
Own it, dude. Be more vocal. Come on. So humble.
A public pioneer, how about that?
I wouldn't say that either. But...
We need you to be one.
I just enjoy the plant. I mean, as simple as that. And
don't we all, right?
So what did you tell Adam? How did you persuade him?
Well, he smelled it when I walked in. So
it is what it is.
Pretty much, you know what I'm saying? He kind of understood where this was going, and then I mean, it's the NBA, man. Everybody is like, everybody does it. It's like wine at this point.
But thank God for sports leagues in this industry, because it's one of the few meritocracies that we have left. Because it turns out when you let the best of the best rise to the top regardless, well, 80% of the best like to consume cannabis. And so take from that what you will. Well, we got this one from Marijuana Moment as Republican senators admit that cannabis legalization disrupts cartels as they urge FDA to reconsider prohibiting another substance that the cartels would try and take over. And so not going to spend much time on this one, but highlighting the four clowns that either lack the self-awareness to be this dumb, or they're just paid to be this dumb and they don't mind, as the acknowledgments come in a letter urging the FDA to reconsider plans to ban menthol cigarettes and set nicotine content limits, arguing that the prohibition and strict regulations of something could benefit illicit trafficking operations, not realizing that they're making the argument to end prohibition right there. And so very hilarious. Bit more here, you can pause to read, otherwise grab the full link in the description. But with that, from Tom Engel as of this morning, July 26th, and he says it's big. It's more big for him because he can write a baity headline that's going to get him a lot of clicks, when in reality, even in the last 2 weeks, I've shared stories about the amendments being added into the NDAA, blocked again. We just see this every time, and so while he's hopeful, he's relaying that the House Rules Committee is allowing floor votes on amendments to let military veterans get medical cannabis recommendations from VA doctors and to encourage psychedelic research. While we all agree that this should be the thing, and obviously more cannabis research as well, when we look at the tone of this last article, chances are those amendments are not going to get passed. And so while he's hopeful, and while we all want this to be the case, it's just playing politics and knowing that these are likely going to get shot down. But of course, I will update you. Well, we got this one out of the mayor of Miami, who's a lot more cannabis friendly and safe banking friendly than Florida's Attorney General, Florida's Supreme Court, and Florida's governor. So thank God we have this little beacon of light in what appears to be a dark situation as we look for adult use to be on the ballot in 2024 in Florida. But just wanted to share what he has to say. I know he is running for president, I think, in 2024, not like he has a shot, but at least someone with some sway in one of the biggest, or in the biggest city in Florida, it does see the benefits of safe banking and, passing, or at least ending prohibition for adult use there. And so with that, from Marijuana Moment, Florida Supreme Court gives AG more time to argue why cannabis legalization should be blocked from 2024 ballot. Why is the Florida Supreme Court siding with an AG who wants to work against the will of the American people? I don't get it. But on the same day that the AG, whose office is seeking to invalidate the cannabis measure, filed a motion seeking the 1 week extension, the court agreed to the delay. And so they get the 1 week extension. And then from my understanding, as a result, the current deadline gives the opponents, so obviously the people for cannabis legalization, just 3 business days to respond to arguments in that brief, the motion said. What a little cunt move, fucker. And so obviously we hope that this does not end up winning, but should have a bit of an update in 2 weeks or so, whether it's going to be on the ballot or not. And so with that, out of other states, this one from the business of cannabis. Oh, not yet. This is a cookie story before we get to other states. You got to be kidding me. Okay, folks, I've got to finish the story. Cookie's accused of burning through cash and running out of money by investor group. More here if you wanted to pause to read. New law to bring sweeping changes to Nevada's cannabis industry starting in 2024. And so as of July 26, more down here if you wanted to pause to read. Oh, thank God it's just a false alarm and I didn't end this video. So you can pause to read from here down to having a distinction between, while... pause read a little bit more. Otherwise, full link in the description if you want to learn about Nevada. And while we know that Nevada has been struggling, sales have not been going up. Hopefully some of these changes might facilitate some improvements to that legal market to help it offset the illicit one there. Well, with that one from Ohio, as apparently Ohio cannabis legalization measure falls 679 signatures short of November ballot, but activists now have 10 days to fix that. No doubt they can find 679 signatures in 10 days, I'm sure, but here's where it gets pretty suspect, because the Coalition to Regulate Cannabis like Alcohol in Ohio turned in more than 220,000 signatures earlier this month. But the Secretary of State's office said in a letter to the campaign on Tuesday that only 123,367 were verified, several hundred short of the 124,046 signature requirement for the ballot measure. How on earth can they just claim that over 100,000 were not valid? Like, who has the ability to dictate that? And who has the nerve to claim that half of the ballots were just fake? Like, this is just such horseshit. So I don't know what comes from this. Obviously, we're going to know in 10 more days whether they get enough signatures to put it on the ballot. So while we hate to see unconstitutional shenanigans like this continue, the good news is that a recent poll showed over 58% of Ohio voters do support legalizing adult cannabis use, and this is as of July 26th. And so seems fairly recent. About 35% opposed the issue, while 6% were undecided or didn't have the courage to tell the truth, meaning it could be more than 58.6%, but this leaves it at that. And so we're hopeful that Ohio will get what is necessary necessary to put this on the off-year ballot in 2023. While out of New York, some updates why New York's third largest city can't get a handle on its unlicensed cannabis stores. The hilarity of this, just to highlight, well, before we get to the next story, but Brad Racino, thank you for sharing my favorite New York resource or source. It's a problem, said Yonkers Mayor Mike Spano. Of the 10 illegal smoke shops closed down so far this year, most, if not all of them, have reopened, he said. And of course, you got to go after the owner. The owners know who they're leasing it out to, and that seems to be the obvious solution for that problem. But on top of that, the Buffalo News is like, well, you know what? The mayor of the third largest city can't seem to get a grip on illicit stores. We're going to try and ban cannabis use in public, including all of edibles, after just legalizing a few years back. Like, this is going to be it's a lot easier said than done, I would imagine. So let me know what you think. Do you think it's just insane for state senator to think that they have this sort of pull and this influence after ending the criminalization of it? Obviously, you can try and implement common sense policy over time, but it just seems ridiculous. Not that it's backtracking on ending cannabis prohibition. It's funny that New York thinks they can do all the things that they can do when in reality they're just the worst cannabis market in the country. And so full link in the description if you want to go through that one. While this one, my favorite source out of Europe from Tom Blickman, providing an update out of Germany. Just figured I would share it for what it's worth. I will provide updates if we get more info. But according to him, according to a report by the scientific services of the Bundestag, which I believe is the German government, there are limits under European law to the extensive decriminalization of cannabis in Germany. Oh no, what could this mean? And so looking at the second bit, does this mean more delays in Germany's eventual adult use plan or their adult light plan, whatever they're doing? According to the assessment of the scientific services, it appears doubtful whether state or state-controlled cannabis cultivation and delivery systems for private enjoyment fall under a relative opening clause, according to the report. And all that to say, this may be true, but the government has the power to regulate cannabis by law. However, she must then also actively undertake something and not remain idle. So are they saying that Germany does have the power to regulate their own laws and they have to just do something about it and not remain idle? I'm not sure, just trying to put the pieces together as we go through this. And the scientific services is therefore much more cautious in its conclusions than CSU MP Pilsinger and Der Spiegel. And so I'm not necessarily sure if this is between two different parties, but it does seem promising that it's possible that Germany can still move ahead with their initial plans. Not saying that they will, but just sharing what we know as of right now. And so with that, from High Times, Albania apparently legalizes medical cannabis, and so Parliament approved the measure by a vote of 69 to 23. Good job, Albania, and those that need access to a safer, non-addictive medicinal alternative. And with that, a bit more information if you wanted to pause to read. But this bill's passage is notable given Albania's history as a European crossroads for cannabis trafficking, obviously because it's been prohibited. Cannabis growing flourished in Albania in the past as a drug trafficker exploited a lack of strong governance in the post-communist country. After coming to power in 2013, the left-wing Socialist Party government of Prime Minister Edi Rama set destroying cannabis plants as a main target. You need an enemy? Make it cannabis plants. How retarded. Over the next 2 years, it destroyed millions of cannabis plants with an estimated market value of 7 billion euros, more than 2/3 of the country's annual gross domestic product at the time. Imagine they knew it was medicine and could, export that and make money and tax revenue for their citizens. In 2014, a police officer was fatally shot during a crackdown on the southern village using armored personal carriers. Again, a side effect of Prohibition. Police came under automatic weapon and rocket fire from drug growers. A side effect of Prohibition. Albania is still a main traffic route for trafficking hard drugs. Police still crack down on isolated cases of cannabis growing, and much more less often than a decade ago. But all of this, a product of cannabis prohibition. And so hopefully for legalizing medical as a first step before adult use, they might see some improvements in their country. And so with that, a few more stories before we head out. This one from Fuego1050 on Reddit. Again, it's a Reddit post, so take it with a grain of salt, but figured I would share it as it highlights Q2 sales data from Headset. But never mind safe. I mean, it would have been a great bonus to show that Congress is still working for the will of the American people, but they're not. And while we know they could have passed safe standalone a few years back in order to actually provide equal access to opportunity for those harmed by the war on drugs or those social equity applicants, they haven't. And so who's suffering? Mostly just the American people based on the bad government policy over the last few years. But the good news is that nationwide, cannabis sales are booming because of it. And so while this is usually the data we see on new cannabis ventures, I guess Alan hasn't updated a site yet, so giving it to you this way. So you can pause to read for Arizona, Florida, and Illinois. If you'd like to pause to read, those are the first three. Then I'll bring you down to Maryland, Massachusetts, thank God for Maryland launching adult use. Michigan, Nevada, New Jersey, and Ohio you can pause to read. And then last bit, other, PA, New York, Minnesota, and Connecticut. And of course, you can grab the link if you want to go through any of the comments. But with that, an oldie but goodie, a more important one that I wanted to share with you, as this is the most important deadline and catalyst we're looking for this year. And while we want SAFE in the interim to help those that need it, the small business owners, more likely we're going to see some sort of ruling like this. And while we're hopeful that the HHS and DOJ rescheduling review will come before December 2nd, knowing the Dems, chances are it's going to come likely around December 2nd, and chances are it's already sitting in a folder waiting for this day to be used as a political move. It sucks because we know that all Americans can agree on cannabis, and 91% is just it's nonsense at this point. But all that to say is that if we don't get SAFE until now, rescheduling to Schedule 3, 4, or 5 is a big deal. Obviously, descheduling is the best case scenario that we're all hoping for, but will not happen because the government will not give up that control. Chances are the most likely thing is rescheduling to Schedule 3. And that doesn't necessarily require SAFE anymore because then cannabis goes from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 and it's no longer illegal overnight. And so that could be a big deal. I am planning accordingly for it. Now, again, this is not advice, just my opinion and trying to share as much context so you can plan accordingly. But I do plan to stack some cash in my TFSA in hopes to accumulate green thumb and increase my position in air wellness before the date and this sort of announcement gets made. And so with that, of course, full link in the description if you wanted to go through that. Cannabis Investing Network, a great resource over time. They're typically more active when we're on the the run up, and then they typically go away. Their timing seems to be much better than everyone else. I'm going to pay attention to them going forward, but they're back with an episode, The Case for Owning Cannabis Stocks. And so I have not listened to this yet. I do plan to listen later today, but figured I would share it as a resource if you wanted to tune in. And last bit, I saw this before I started the video, so figured I would share it as Tilray Brands reports record Q4 financial results and a surprising record Q4 net revenue of $184 million, which is definitely an improvement from what we've seen Tilray floating around the $140 million to $160 million over the last 2 years. No doubt it's because they bought up a lot of the market share from their competitors. But all that to say is this was the first morning in a long time where you could Google Tilray ticker, NASDAQ, and see them up 23% pre-market. Brings you back to the summer of 2020, which was essentially the last bottom before we ran slowly but surely up until February 2021 highs. And so this is not advice for Tilray, just pointing this out because I thought it was interesting. But that is it for today's episode, folks. I want to thank you so much for tuning in, and I really hope you got some value out of it. What did you think of the stories mentioned? Let me know in the comments if you have any questions or suggestions, and I'd be happy to address them. But besides that, if you enjoyed this video and you learned something, please just leave a like on it. Subscribe below if you don't want to miss any future videos, and I will catch you on Sunday for This Week in Cannabis News. Have a great week, everybody.